You're also going to have access to the closed captioning function on Zoom if you need it. You will need to turn this on yourself on your end so that you're able to read the captions, but it will be available to you. And then we're going to have space for a Q&A session later in the session today. So if you want to have your questions answered, the best way to do that is to use the Q&A function here on Zoom. So there's a little Q&A bubble in your Zoom UI. And if you click on that, you'll be able to ask your questions there. This is how we're going to be doing the Q&A. You will not be able to join the call. We will not be reading the chat for questions. We just ask that you submit them all via the Q&A. So if you want your questions answered, that's the best way of doing it. That said, if you have some questions that are very specific to your situation and your application, we would advise that rather than asking them here in this venue, that you email us, and you can send your questions to fulbrightprograms@fulbright.org.uk, and that's the best way to get those questions answered. In terms of the webinar today, we've got a number of people on this webinar, and we're all looking forward to talking to you about your Fulbright application. My name is Sam Thompson. I'm the Senior Program Manager for UK Programs, and I'm joined by a couple of my team members. So I'm joined by Rebecca Jackson-Woolley, who is our Program Officer for UK Programs, and Heather Creer, who is our Admin Assistant. And then we're joined by two alums from, or current students even, on the Fulbright UK PG program, who are giving up their time for their day to come and speak with you all about their experience of making an application. So we're joined by Amy Lister, who is one of our all disciplines postgraduates at Georgetown University, and Jonathan Bramley Sturgeon, who is our Fulbright Alistair Cook grantee at Columbia University. And we will hear from them a little bit as the webinar goes on about what they did to write compelling applications. And I'm sure they'll have lots of really valuable things to share with all of you. So here are some things that we're going to cover through the webinar today. So first off, we've got our headline tips. These are the things that I want to make sure that people are taking away from this webinar. If nothing else, make sure you pay attention to those. The different elements that you're going to be able to impact of your application. Some pre-application strategy if you've not started already, or some things you may want to go back to. Tips for writing your application itself, a little bit on the different placement options. So if you've done some research already, you'll know that there are different ways you can find your university through Fulbright, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and then our Q&A at the end. So let's get into those headline tips. These are the things that I think are absolutely crucial, and that if you take away nothing else from this evening, make sure that you take away these. So first of all, it's not too late to start. We've got over a month before the deadline, which means you've got time to be working on this application. It might seem a little bit like we're midway through the application period and you don't know whether it's worth it this year or not. You can always submit an application. There's no fee attached. There's no downside to submitting an application, even if you don't feel like you've got all the time in the world to do it. But what I would say is be strategic about making your application. If you are a little bit more limited on time, make sure that you are thinking about how to use your time as best as possible. And when it comes to using your time well, think about how you can make use of different elements of the application in your favor. So for instance, you could be reaching out to your referees while you're still writing parts of the application, like your personal statement, because those two things can be done entirely independently, which means your referees aren't going to be late when it comes to submitting your references. I also recommend you access the information provided by Fulbright. We make a lot of information about this process available on our website. There are previous webinars on our YouTube channel. We have our Fulbright ambassadors that are available for you. So that link there, fulbright.org.uk, our programs, Fulbright Scholarships, the USA, UK Postgraduate, that will take you to all of the information that we provide about the UK Postgraduate Program. It will take you to the different awards that you can apply for, the different partner awards. There will be our country-specific applications. And if there's one document you read in the run-up to writing an application, those country-specific instructions should be the thing you focus on. And there's also a link to our Fulbright Ambassadors page. So this is a place where you can go to chat to alumni, to ask them questions about their experience and their experience of making an application. And you might find that useful in this process too. In terms of the application elements that you have power over when you submit the application, Yeah, there are going to be things you're submitting like your academic transcript. Yes, you have an input on that, but it's not a thing you can focus on when writing your application. So these are the things that we're going to advise you to pay attention to when you are writing your application, because they are the areas where you can most imbue the application with what sets you apart from other applicants. These are your CV, they're your reflective essay, and those who are maybe making an application for the second time, I would encourage you to go back to the application instructions, because that reflective essay, which was optional last year, is now a mandatory part of our application. So you must submit a reflective essay to make sure that you are submitting a complete and eligible application. You have your study objective, your personal statement, 3 letters of recommendation or references, and then just complete the application form. So look at our instructions, make sure you're submitting a supplemental form, make sure you're doing all of the pages of the application, because missing out any of those elements is likely to weaken your application, or at least make it seem like it's incomplete, which is going to reflect poorly upon it. When it comes to getting started, maybe you've already made a start, maybe you're early on in your application, or maybe you're midway through, but these are just some useful things to go back and think about. An important part of pre-application is going to be your research. Make sure you're researching Fulbright. Think about the program. What's the program about? Why does it exist? Where can you find that information? We have a lot on our website, not just on the program pages, but in our About Us section. And that can help inform your application and maybe what you're aiming to get out of this experience. Also, you're going to want to research universities and the academic programs that you're interested in. And there's going to be lots of ways of doing that. We're going to hand over to our students to talk a little bit about how they approach this. But some things that you might want to think about is researching which universities offer courses you're interested in, maybe looking at what those courses are like on both the university websites, but also seeing if there's anything available on places like YouTube or social media where students share their experiences of those courses and campuses. You can look at some of if you're applying to stay in the same field that you're already in, maybe you could look at who's writing the research that you most enjoy or that you find most influential on the way that you approach your field, and then using that to find where those researchers and professors are based in the US. I would encourage you to really take this process seriously. I'd also encourage looking at Education USA. This is another organization that we work with, and they have lots of information about postgraduate awards and how to get started with your research there. But Amy, Johnny, how did you approach doing your research before making your Fulbright?
Do you want me to start, Amy? I was very fortunate. I had a friend who was here at Columbia doing the same program that I'm currently in at the journalism school, and I had visited by chance in a year I'd taken off between undergraduate and then working on an application for this. And I came to the school and really liked what they stood for, but I didn't stop there. I checked out all of the different universities that offered journalism courses. I really spent a lot of time getting to grips with what I wanted to get out of a master's education or a postgraduate education, looking at the various courses and letting that be imbued into my application for Fulbright, in recognition that it's not just an academic experience that you're applying for with Fulbright, but it's more of a holistic and cultural one. You know, I get just as much education from being sat here in a classroom in this big fancy old building as I will in the next few days over spring break. I'm heading to Montana for a road trip for a few days, and I'm just as looking forward to that as I am this. So I think the research is recognizing not just necessarily what each university offers and what Fulbright offers, but what it is that you individually are looking to take out from postgraduate training and education. That would be my advice. Maybe that's wrong.
No, that's really well put. Amy, what would you have?
My biggest takeaway actually were when I met the fellow Fulbrighters when we sort of convened in London before all jetting off, is that there's no typical Fulbrighter. We all had very different profiles, and there's not one sort of, CV that will get you the scholarship. And as Johnny said, it's not just academic, it's also cultural. So I had a very strong idea about which program I wanted to do, which is the one that I'm doing now at Georgetown, just because, as you said, Sam, this faculty is just very well renowned in the field of Arab studies. So I was already very familiar with the work that the professors here are putting out. And I happened to sort of reach out to a few students here who were very positive about their experience. And I really tried to tie in what it was about the program that appealed to me into my Fulbright application to sort of strengthen the vision that I had for what I was going to get out of the scholarship, like Johnny said. But I would really say I was blown away by the sort of profiles of different people that are also on Fulbright scholarships, like Johnny and everyone else across the country. So
very kind. I would also say in relation to, and maybe this is something Sam's about to touch on, in relation to the partner awards, the advice I was given, at least, and maybe Sam can correct me, is that if there is a partner award that is like more specific or better tailored, then maybe it's worth considering that. So I am on the Alistair Cook Award, which is specifically for journalism. And I'm sure Sam will discuss, there's ones for different programs in different places and different things. So it's always worth looking into which one might be more applicable than just the kind of general all applicant one.
I think, well, excellent segue there, because that is exactly what I was going to talk about. Is we have our partner awards here, which are awards either from different organizations that we work with or from universities that we work with, which are often much more specific, either because they are tied to a specific institution or because they are within a specific field or discipline. And if these apply for you, and I recommend reading them, they are well worth an application, as Johnny says, because you are going to be competing with a smaller pool of people. It's often a much more strategic decision because you're competing with people who are also within that field, rather than with people who are applying for every university in every field under the sun. You are looking at just a much more specific award, which, if it works for you, can be great because they offer further advantages in terms of working with universities that specialize in those kinds of studies. So we have a award with the University of Maryland in their School of Public Policy, which is an excellent school for studying public policy, or our award with Nurston and the University of Florida, which works with their Food and Agriculture School, and is a perfect place to go to look at issues surrounding food, agriculture, climate, food security, all of those kinds of areas, which, you know, if that's something you are interested in doing a master's degree in, this is a perfect way of finding that kind of support. We have our awards with BAFTA, which is for anyone who is interested in filmmaking, and is sponsored by the BAFTA organization. And this is for, as I say, anyone interested in filmmaking, and it can be any aspect of filmmaking, but it is specifically filmmaking rather than film theory or film criticism. And then our award with American University is an award that will find students going to American University, which is a university right in the heart of Washington, D.C., and is a place where you'll find a lot of support for the Fulbright program amongst the faculty and staff at the university. And that can be used for any degree at American University other than in their business school. And an award that's not here, but is returning to our catalogue this year, is our Sir Cyril Taylor Changemakers Award. So this is for anyone who is interested in sort of social entrepreneurship or driving positive social change within their field. And doing your research around these and seeing if there are any that apply to the kind of field or universities you're interested in attending is going to pay off, as Johnny says. I think finding that ability to find your niche and find something that is holistically right for you is going to help you out a great deal in this process, which can be very competitive. Some other things to talk about, I've already mentioned this Fulbright documentation and the country-specific instructions. As much as there is no to go back to Amy's point, as much as there is no CV or no kind of profile that makes someone right for a Fulbright, there's also no surprises in this process. We're not hiding any secret sauce about how you make yourself the right candidate from it. For this, everything is in those country-specific instructions. They're a guide to get through the entire application. And you'll also find some things that are maybe a little bit weird on the application form because it's designed for a global audience. So not everything you read on the application form is going to feel necessarily like it applies to candidates applying from the UK, or it may contradict some of the information you've read on the website. If at any point there are contradictions, you should refer to the country-specific instructions that we provide instead of the things you find in the application form. When it comes to this and your research, all I'm going to do is advise that you read everything carefully, you make any notes, you highlight whatever it is that you use to make sure you're remembering things and going back to them. That's going to help you a great deal here. I also recommend making a list. Make a list of the things you need to complete to make sure your application is there. Make a list of ideas that you want to go into your application and things that you think are important for how you want to present yourself. As both of our students have said, this is not just an academic process. You're not just applying for a degree. you're applying for a Fulbright program, and Fulbright is a cultural exchange as much as it is an academic one. So an example of something that I would encourage you to put on a list of things you need to include is make it clear why you want to study in the US. Make it clear how that's going to apply to your studies. What is it that interests you about being in another country while doing a master's degree? And why is it this program that is interesting to you? I don't know if there were other things that the two of you did to prepare for starting your application, but these are certainly some of the things that come to mind.
I think one thing that really helped me was to go really thoroughly through the Fulbright values. So really understanding what Fulbright is looking for, and they're very clear about those on the website. So I would really encourage you to look at those and see which ones you resonate with, or even which ones you aspire to sort of, embody. And the other thing I would say is get in touch with your references as soon as possible. I had a bit of a stress I lost touch with one of them. And I was really stressed trying to get them to submit my reference on time. And then the third thing I would say was I had conflicting advice. Some were saying, go for a big name professor from your university that will sort of get you a good reference. But I chose to go for referees that knew me personally really well, so they could write a compelling reference that really reflected what I was trying to say in my application. So that would be some tips I would give.
I'd concur with that. I had a similar incident with a reference. He was someone in public policy and government, and he had a big fish to fry, and it took until the morning of the deadline for me to. I was calling the MOD, asking for his contact and his secretary just to get through to him, and he finally pinged it off with a couple of hours to spare, and it was tight. So definitely do that. I would also say if you have questions, ask Sam and Rebecca and the team. Don't go to those kind of weird Reddit threads online, which are outdated or full of random information, because one quick glance, you realize most people probably aren't the font of knowledge that they claim to be. So if you have questions, just go through the team. Sorry if that's more work for you, Sam, but go through that way.
But that's why we're here. And I think to echo both of you on the reference one, every referee is another data point for your application. And so not having someone that knows you well is a disadvantage. And then the application information does change every year. It doesn't change a great deal, but as I said already earlier, that reflective essay is something we're making mandatory this year. So if you were to go to another source of information than us or our website, you would be being misinformed about this process and risking submitting a good application. So really good advice from both of them there too. In terms of writing your application, these are some ideas. So we're talking about all of the written sections here. So the three things we're focusing on are that reflective essay, the study objective, which is sort of your proposal for why that university or why the course that you want to study or why the question you want to answer matters and why you want to be the person to do it, and your personal statement. So a little bit more about you and how this factors into your journey or what you want out of this kind of experience. The first thing I'm going to say is read the specifications. I'm going to sound like a broken record at this point, but the instructions are important and they're going to help you stay on task. We have introduced some really specific word limits this year as well to make sure that we're reading applications as well as we can. So make sure you're sticking to everything we ask for. Write a plan. Make sure you've got just some ideas. They can just be bullet points, but having a sense of what it is you want to start off talking about is always going to help. Next one is just start. Looking at a blank piece of paper, certainly I know I'm in this situation whenever I'm writing something for work, but blank piece of paper is your worst enemy, and having anything on it, even if that doesn't make the final piece that you submit, is going to be a huge help. And on that draft again, take a break, draft again, and just, it can be super rough to start with, but as long as you are taking time to refine it, you're going to be much happier than trying to write something perfect on the first try. Get advice and find resources. There are people who have written applications for things all over the place who will have great insights. It's not necessarily a Fulbright specific thing, but when thinking about like the US university and application process and how it differs from the UK one, that can be helpful for thinking about this, because like the US university application, Fulbright is a very holistic process. So looking at people like College Essay Guy, for instance, who writes free resources on how to write good undergraduate application essays. It might just be helpful for reframing how you approach something, especially because this is slightly different from a typical UK postgrad application. And get advice. Ask your friends, your family, various mentor figures to read your application and provide some insight, because people will have different perspectives than you and might be able to give you a new way of looking at what you've written already. Take some breaks. This is good advice or anything, but getting some space from what you've written will help you write a better draft when you're back. And then thinking about sort of the Fulbrightness of these applications and how they differ, make sure you're putting yourself into the application. We give you space to do this in the reflective essay and the personal statement, but it also doesn't hurt to put yourself into that study objective as well. It's a little bit of a different style of writing than I think people are often used to from a UCAS application, for instance. But it makes a world of difference because this is a holistic process. So make sure you and your interests make it into the application. And then think about what your application is doing as a cohesive piece. So what's the story? What are you trying to put together as a narrative throughout your application? Or what's the lens? So Amy already talked about looking at the Fulbright values, for instance, and thinking about which of those inspire you, which of those do you aspire to. Those things can go a great way into making your application stand out. Both of you have written an application and I haven't, so I'm sure you've got far more to offer than I have, because this to me felt like fairly generic advice. But having been there fairly recently, what was your approach to this kind of task?
I'll jump in first. I toiled on the application and the process and the personal essay, the study objective, and it really took, sitting down with a blank piece of paper and working out what it was that I thought would make my application ever so slightly different, and not in a cynical way of kind of gaming the system, but as in, what is it that you want to offer? Because it's a two-way relationship. It's a give and take. It's Amy and I are both incredibly lucky to be here in America, and we are very fortunate. But there's also an element that we are joining, decades-old institution and organization, and it's what can we do in our own right to give back, and where do we stand in maybe a way that others don't. So for me, my background was very different and slightly bizarre, and I was a boat builder at the time, working up in Yorkshire, and I want to go into maritime journalism, and that's very luckily what I'm here doing now. So I spent a page or 2 pages, whatever it was, writing about the lessons I'd learned in a boatyard. Now that's very distinct and very different, but I think whatever your boatyard is, whatever your boat is, what is it that you have done that you are particularly proud of, that you want someone like Sam or Rebecca or anyone on the committee to read and know about you? That's what should be probably put before them, as opposed to the kind of the nonsensical filler words and sentences about how passionate you are about education. Demonstrate it, show it, don't just tell. And that would be my advice. Find out whatever it is that you think makes you a strong applicant, and don't be afraid to talk about it. If it makes you look slightly weird, it makes you look slightly weird. I'm sure I look like an absolute weirdo in my application, raving about boats. Sam was nodding earlier. I can see a small nod there and a smile. But work out what it is that you think makes your application distinct. As Amy said, apply that to the values of Fulbright. You will probably write things about how excited you are about American culture, and you're like, I feel that, but I'm not like 100% sure about it. But actually, really get to grips with what that means for you. Because if you are lucky enough to get it and you are fortunate enough to end up here, you'll realize that those sentences, though you're not entirely sure what they mean at the time, are wholeheartedly truthful. And it's a very great privilege to be able to get a Fulbright for all of those reasons. So yeah, sit down, work out what's special about you, and get it on paper, and be willing to write so many drafts and kill your first draft and just write and write and write.
I think, just to echo what Johnny's saying, I saw it as sort of writing a story. So where I've been so far and what that means that I can bring to the Fulbright scholarship, where I was in that moment, and then where I wanted to go and how Fulbright would help me get there. So that's kind of like the element of exchange that Johnny is sort of touching on. And as Johnny said, I think, really trying to fit your story into the Fulbright values sort of helps to structure your essay, but don't sort of bend over backwards to try and fit a certain profile. As I was saying, your story is unique. You are you because of your experience so far. So try and weave that into a compelling narrative that shows why this is sort of like the trajectory that makes sense for you.
I would also add to that there's at least from my understanding and what I thought was important when I was trying to convey my desire to become a Fulbrighter, is that any one of you could probably go and do a master's in the UK. And it's very important for you to therefore distinguish and explain why going to America is so important. So yes, it's your story, but how does America fit into that? Not just kind of, I want to go and do a master's. You've got to be cognizant that this is going overseas. This is travel and education in a different continent, in a different country. And just be aware of that and think about how that plays into your story. Whether it's something you've wanted to do for years or it's something you've come across in recent months, think about why that's still important to you and try and convey that to the best of your abilities.
And why that element, I suppose, of international exchange matters to you in terms of, because this is an exchange, it's not like a permanent thing. It's going to matter sort of thinking about your community back home, whether that's one you want to build or one you're in already. I think that's really important. And I think, maybe I see you've unmuted, and I will shut up in a moment to let you speak if you had something you wanted to add to this. But I think what I just wanted to clarify is there is something compelling about every single one of you listening to this right now, and it's going to be different for each of you, which is to say, if you've never built a boat before, that's not going to count against your application, and you will find things, even if you have to ask the people around you what it is that's compelling about you. Don't shy away from doing that, because there is something compelling about every single one of you, and that will make your application have a hook. And I think it's a really key part of writing something that people will read and remember.
Yeah, I think I was just going to add that I found it helpful to talk to people around me about why I wanted to do this and sort of listen to the questions that they threw back at me, because that helped me to sort of distill my reasoning. You know, I'm doing Arab studies, so why on earth do you want to study the Middle East in America rather than going to the Middle East? So I had to sort of grapple with that and come up with an answer. And I think I included it in my application because I felt that that might be something that the Fulbright team would be asking themselves. So it might be helpful to sort of think about what sort of pushback you might get or what sort of questions your application will sort of foster, and then answer those in your writing as well.
That's really, really good advice. I like that a lot. That's excellent. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about placement options, because this is a decision you will have to make on the application form. And it's really the only one, other than choosing a partner award, this is really the only other one that at this stage is going to matter a great deal. So we have two different placement options: the independent placement or self-placed option. This is where you are going to research and apply to the universities yourself. The way that the timeline works out means that you will apply for Fulbright often before making these applications. However, if you are in the situation where you are holding a deferred offer or you've already made some applications, this is also the correct path for you to choose. We also consider those university partner awards, so American University, Maryland School of Public Policy, and the Mercedes, Florida Award, to be independent or self-placed awards as well. These are with specific institutions, and you will be making applications to those universities. If this is the path that you are planning to take through the application, I would encourage you to research the universities now, because we would expect to see you write about, even if it's the first two choices and you're going to apply to 4 or 5, we would like to see that interest and that passion for those universities in the application. It's a really good idea to make sure you're talking about them, because like what our students are saying about putting what it is that makes going to America important about this, these universities are going to factor into that as well. And I think it's worth thinking about some specifics here, either things that are specific to you or things that are specific to the course and how that fits with you, because there are a lot of universities out there that we've already read a lot about, and a lot of just repeating some of the facts that you'll find on their website or their Wikipedia page, for instance, aren't going to impress our committee in the same way as someone who's done a lot of research and shows why that university is the right fit for them and their studies. In terms of the IAE placement model, through our team at Fulbright, you would work with a placement advisor to find the best academic fit. This rewards a little bit of flexibility, because you're not going to have complete control over the universities that are being offered to you to make for those final applications. That said, this route often offers a little bit more financial support, and the team that does the advising are experts in their fields when it comes to the landscape of US higher ed. So we're often able to find institutions that have the right fit for your program or your academic interests that maybe aren't going to necessarily occur to you, because there are thousands of universities in the US that offer postgraduate degrees, and having a good understanding of all of them whilst you're also trying to write an application isn't a small task. And so I would encourage you to think about which route through this you would like to take, because making a decision here is a big one that is going to impact your application and your experience on the program. But there is information about this on our website. We've got students here who have been through both options, and we've also got alums who have been through both options who may be on our ambassador program to talk to. So lots of opportunities to learn more about these. I don't know if either of you had anything you wanted to add about this, or if it's something we can cover more in our Q&A in case people have questions, but there's space if you want to take it, but I'm happy to.
So I was, I think Amy's independent, but I was on the IIE track, which one of those things that when you first look at it, you're like slightly confused what's going on. But as Sam explained, it is very simple. The IIE one, the reason I did it for a few reasons. Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's also the financial side of that?
Yeah, so this is our we call it our opportunity fund, but this is where students who are can apply through this placement and be eligible for up to a fully funded cost of attendance at their US university, which is something newer that's made its way to our program. But as Johnny says, like it is a potential incentive for some students as well.
Yeah. So for me, there was the reason I picked IIE. Independent has some great stuff too, but the strengths of the IIE, in my opinion, was potential access to that opportunity fund. As Sam said, the ability to have an advisor, like a guidance counselor, I'm not really sure if the Americans term it, whatever, but someone here in the US who understands the American education system, who can say to me, okay, you've considered X, Y, and Z universities, but have you considered these other programs? And all the reasons they're wonderful. And it might be that in doing so, you unleash a new pot of gold onto where you go. And I think that's really valuable, but also the practical side for 3 of my 4 universities. And I think it's usually the 4 of 4. The IIE advisor will help and use your Fulbright material to apply like kind of on your behalf, if that's right, Sam, partially or so. And it takes out a lot of stress of the application, especially if you were like me and didn't have a set specific university you wanted to necessarily go to and was slightly more flexible and open and wanted access to maybe a bit of more financial support if you're in a similar position to me, and that's something that was required.
Yeah, I think the independent placement model is like fairly self-explanatory. You sort of, and in my case, it worked out because I had such a clear idea about which university I wanted. And so if that's you and you don't really want to consider other options, then I guess it makes sense. But you are sort of, you do the Fulbright application and then you have to do another application on your ones. So it just sort of depends what kind of person you are. And as Johnny said, like you don't have the access to the additional funding. So I did research very extensively about the funding available through the university that I was looking at to sort of make up that gap for my personal situation.
And that goes back to almost our first slide, right, about how important research is in this process. And if you're doing that independent placement, that research is, I would argue, even more important than just for the application itself, because you are going to need to know more about those universities. If funding is going to matter to you, more about the funding situation. So all of these things sort of add up into making that research burden a little bit more on that side, but definitely worth doing, certainly. Our deadline is going to be Tuesday, the 6th of May. In the past, we've normally made it the first Monday of May, but this is a bank holiday. So if you have questions, best to get them in before the bank holiday if you want us to answer them. We are not going to be working on the bank holiday. The deadline is going to be at 5 p.m. GMT, so we are going to be around on the day, but I would recommend submitting your application before the deadline day if you possibly can, because what you don't want is a situation where you're panicking and rushing to complete it, or risking missing the deadline because there are issues with your internet or something else that just crops up and gets in the way. So if you can submit before this Tuesday, 6th of May deadline, please do. But that is the deadline that you need to be paying attention to. And now we'll move to our Q&A. I see there have been questions submitted throughout the webinar, so I will let Rebecca take the floor and ask away.
Perfect. So yeah, we've received quite a lot of questions. Just to say off the bat, if we're not able to get to your question, please do email it to us so that we can take the time to get back to you. But yeah, so we've received quite a lot of questions from students regarding sort of the timeline, whether they should apply to Fulbright first, whether they should apply to their institutions first, and I guess sort of the differences in the timeline for the IE placement program versus the independent placement program, if we could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so the timeline is there so that you can apply to Fulbright and have knowledge of your Fulbright outcome when you are moving into making applications for your institution. So the current applications are open for academic year 2026-27. So anyone applying to Fulbright this year, if they are successful in getting on the program, will start their course normally, if they're applying for a normal master's course, in the August or September of 2026. So that means that if successfully you have been shortlisted and interviewed and made an offer by the time that you're starting to make those applications. Now, of course, if there are people holding deferred offers and things like that, doesn't necessarily apply to them because because they will be holding that already at time of application. But hopefully the way this process is set up now is it gives you time to focus on your Fulbright application and then apply that same energy to university applications separately at a different date. Whereas before, these two things used to clash, and that would often be quite difficult for students to manage. Amy, you presumably wrote your Georgetown application in the fall after your Fulbright application, is that right?
Yeah, so I can't remember when the final decision was released, but I definitely knew that I had Fulbright. And then I think I applied, my deadline was early January for Georgetown. So I was writing it, in the winter following the whole Fulbright process.
And that's our aim, is to make sure that students aren't trying to split their time between two different application processes, because we want to give people a fighting chance in both.
We've also received a couple of questions regarding references, so whether a referee could be a current employer, whether applicants have to have at least one academic reference, and yeah, if a previous Fulbright alumnus, could also be a referee.
Yes, to the final part. In terms of your referees, your current employers can absolutely be your referees, and having a range of referees is never going to be a bad thing in terms of coming from different places. Also, people are going to be applying for different kinds of courses, so it becomes quite difficult to answer this question. Is it helpful to have an academic referee? Yes, especially if you're going into a very academic field. If you're applying for a PhD, for instance, we'd probably expect to see an academic referee. But if you're going into something that's maybe a little bit more vocational, so maybe you're applying for the BAFTA award and you've been working for a TV production company, I think we wouldn't be surprised if all three came from professional referees rather than academic ones. Similarly, if you're, say, going for that public policy award or something in a field with like public health, and maybe you've got referees that are from employers in things like the civil service or think tanks, then obviously that's going to be very applicable. So it's very situational. It's very dependent on the person applying. Think about your field, think about what it is you're applying for and who might be the best people to give your references.
So we've also received some questions about how specific applicants should be in their application with regards to the institutions they want to study at. So for the independent placement program, should they focus on one or two specific institutions? And what happens if they don't get admitted to the institutions that they focus on in the application? And then for the IE placement program, should they mention institutions at all, or should they just ensure that they're communicating that they're flexible to study anywhere?
I think for the independent placement program, if you've got institutions that are really important to you, that really matter, make sure that's coming across in the application. Of course, you do have a word count on that study objective, and so make sure you're communicating the other things as well. Don't have a list of 5 universities, write about all 5, and then realize you've got no way of communicating what it is you actually want to go and study. But on the other hand, if we're not seeing anything about those universities, then it's going to be very difficult for us to assess the application. We also know that this is a difficult process and it's a competitive one. So if you end up being offered a Fulbright Award and then one of the universities that was listed in your application but not a detailed account was given as to why you're applying to it, that we're not going to revoke an award over that. We understand you're applying for very similar degree programs at different universities, and that there are no guarantees very often in these processes. So it makes a lot of sense. No need to worry about that one. In terms of the IIE program, I think we would much rather see candidates expressing their interest in US study, in international exchange, in sort of higher education, rather than writing about one or two specific universities, particularly because if a candidate is already married to a dream university before they submit their Fulbright application, then it may actually mean that the IIE placement process isn't necessarily right for them, because they might struggle to have those conversations with the team and with their advisor about different universities if all they really want is a single university out of that experience. So there are different ways of navigating this. Yeah, Johnny, I see you've got your hand up.
I was about to say, yeah, as someone on the IIE, if it helps to people to know, I didn't write about any specific universities. Instead, especially when it came to the study objective, I think is the name of the essay, I wrote very specifically about the subject content and the course, not at X university or Y university, but why I wanted to come and study journalism, specifically documentary journalism, and what I hope to learn from studying that within just an American educational setting, as opposed to like, I have to be in New York, I have to be at this such and such university. Focus more on the content and America in general. I'm not sure if that's particularly helpful, but yeah, I didn't mention any universities.
I think so. Talking about maybe some field specifics of what it is you're interested in is going to help your advisor find that right university, right? If you'd not mentioned maritime journalism or documentary journalism, you might have had a harder time being placed somewhere that was right for you, because that would have come out later in those conversations. But certainly, I think it is helpful to talk about what it is that drives you within your field, so that our colleagues can actually find you a good fit.
We also received several questions regarding funding. So both what is sort of the associated funding with the Core Fulbright Award, and how does it work for programs that are multiple years, be that a 2-year-long master's or a PhD, which can obviously be up to 5 years?
Yeah, this is a great question, and one that I assume matters to most people here, because they're looking at applying for a funding program. So for the independent placement program, we offer up to $65,000, $66,000 at this moment in time, which is to be put towards anything within your studies, including things like tuition costs or living costs. This is paid in installments across the grant period. The idea for a long time with Fulbright is that Fulbright would cover maybe the first year of a US master's, and most masters are 2 years. So in many cases, if you are on the independent placement program, you would need to have additional sources of funding. So looking at maybe what the university offers. I know, Amy, you mentioned that earlier in terms of looking at what Georgetown offers. For PhDs, this can be a little different, because a lot of US PhDs tend to offer some kind of stipend or studentship to their students, which can often alleviate some of the costs of study and living costs. On the IIE placement model, funding's a little bit more difficult to speak to generally, because our colleagues at the IIE are often looking for universities that have more financial aid available to students, and where they've had success in negotiating for extra financial support for students in the past. They also, students on that pathway are eligible for our opportunity fund to reach up to the full cost of attendance. So it's a little bit different. There's a little bit more in terms of moving parts on that one. But the idea, we hope, is that people moving through that program are able to get as close to the full cost of attendance as possible. This isn't always going to be possible if people are opting for very expensive programs and things like that, but the aim is, on average, that we're trying to get as many students as close to fully funded as we can. We're also seeing this more and more in our partner awards. So if you look at those 3 university partner awards, for instance, as well as the stipend from us and the tuition waiver from the university, very often those are coming with sort of research assistantships or other kinds of academic employment on campus that are there to try and help with the funding needs of the program as well.
In light of the current sort of situation in the US, we've received several questions asking if funding for Fulbright is going to be impacted by this, and do we anticipate the status of the Fulbright program changing over the coming years?
So at the US-UK Fulbright Commission, we are a independent body, independent of both the US government and the UK government. We are founded by treaty between these two governments, but we are independent of these governments. And the vast majority of our funding for our programs comes from the UK Department for Education, the universities we work with here in the UK, the universities we work with in the US, and other bodies that fund our awards. So whilst we do have some State Department funding, a lot of our funding actually comes from universities and our UK Department for Education. What this means is we currently, at this time, don't anticipate any difficulties to our funding and our ability to fund students through the programs. And we don't anticipate any difficulties in running the program in a sense moving forward.
In terms of sort of the logistics of the application, so several questions regarding the CV. Do we have a recommended length and sort of a recommended level of detail that applicants go into? And then similarly with the personal statement, how personal should applicants be, and how formal should they be in sort of how they approach these pieces as well?
Yeah, I hate to say it this way because it sounds like a cop-out answer, but in a way, the answer is it depends. Your CV should probably be between 2 and 5 pages. 2 pages is normally what I think of as like the maximum for a professional CV. 5 pages is more common in an academic CV. If you're applying for something like a PhD, you might want to extend it a little bit if you've done some conferences already, or maybe contributed to some published research. Not that that's necessary, but it may be something you've done and want to include. But normally sort of in that 2-page range. I would include things that you think are relevant. Your CV should probably include all of your work experience and your grades at university. But maybe if you've sat modules that are really important to your course that you're interested in taking in the US, I would highlight those in your CV. I would take the opportunity to use the CV to sort of add to that story. You know, we've heard that word come up a lot, this idea of what's the story of your application. Your CV is part of that. Think about using it as an effective tool to communicate who you are and what you bring to this opportunity, as you would with jobs as well. I think it's really important to focus on writing a CV that is relevant to a job rather than just having one that you send to everyone under the sun. In terms of how personals get in the personal statement, people are going to have different comfort levels with what they want to write about themselves. And I think it's going to come down to the individual, but I think it should be fitting within what this program is about and how you want to make the most of this program. So yes, this is about you, but it's not just any old statement about yourself. I think it's important to sort of weave that in. Sorry, Rebecca, there was like a third part to that question.
I think it was just, yeah, how personal applicants should be in their personal statement and how formal they should be in their approach.
That last one's an interesting one because I think if you have a creative approach, especially if you're applying for some kind of MFA where that's relevant, maybe it's maybe that is an approach you want to take with this. I would recommend writing this with sort of an air of professionalism and a sense of formality. You don't need to write it totally formally if that's not your voice. And I think finding your voice is going to be really important. But this is a serious application. It is a professional application in many ways. So I would bring a sense of taking this seriously to when it comes to being formal.
We then received a couple questions about.
Sorry, Rebecca, Johnny.
Oh, sorry.
And I think also Amy. Do you want to go first, Amy?
I was just going to say that I found it helpful. You know, you've got however many essays and you've got your CV. You should see these as sort of in complementarity. Try not to repeat yourself across them. So use the space strategically. So, you know, as Sam said, like you can mention modules that are relevant to the study that you want to do, and maybe mention it briefly in your study objective or whatever, but try to use each space strategically and really think about what the aim of that essay is, or what the aim of your CV, what story you want to tell on it is. So I think that builds a very compelling and effective application rather than just sort of, you know, writing your CV in a CV format and then sort of writing it out in prose in your essay about yourself. There's not a strategic use of that space.
I was going to say the exact same. There's no need to regurgitate material across the 2, 3, 4, whatever separate things there are. And also on the CV one, because I'd come pretty much straight from undergraduate, bar this period of time that I was working on a boat, I think my CV was only 1 page. So not maybe that's not good advice, but like, don't panic if your CV is only 1 page. That was my CV, if I'm being brutally honest. So hopefully that's okay. I think
And
maybe
I
I put
think
my
it's,
foot in it.
yeah, I know. I think it's good to be honest, and I think include things that matter to you. So, if you've been parts of societies at university that maybe demonstrate like how you get involved in community or leadership that you do, and there will be lots of things. And we go back to something I said earlier, but everyone is compelling in their own way, and there will be things that you have done throughout your time at university that maybe seem normal to you because you do them every week, but include it. It's going to be new to the people reading your application, and I think that's a good idea, even if you feel like there's not a lot you can say because you've not had many jobs or you're still in your undergrad. Please just include that information about what it is that you're doing that makes you, because that is going to matter in a holistic process.
We received a couple of questions about the newer reflective essay. So how do people upload the reflective essay? Some questions about that they didn't see the same space in the application form. Also some questions about, is the reflective essay different to the personal statement, and what distinguishes it from the personal statement in what we're looking for?
Yeah, so with the reflective essay, you're going to need to upload that as an additional document on the application form. There's a space for like additional files. This is often used for things like portfolios as well, if you're in a creative field and you want to include portfolio items, but there is a space for additional documents. That's where you should upload the reflective essay. Make sure it's titled so that we know what we're looking at. It's different from the personal statement in our application instructions, we have a little bit about Fulbright's foundation. So the sort of inciting ideas behind why the Fulbright program exists and what are some values that are important to Fulbright. And we're asking candidates to look at those and think about why that matters to them, why a program like this matters to them, and sort of using that as a prompt to write something short and reflective. And there are lots of different angles you can take to approach this. It is yours to do with what you want, but there is a prompt to look at, and that's what separates it from the personal statement. This is a very sort of Fulbright specific thing that we are thinking about within the context of the Fulbright program and why it exists. So you may want to include some of that in your personal statement as well, but you may find that you approach those two questions in very different ways. So read our application instructions. There's everything about the reflective essay is in there. But the idea is that it's a little bit shorter. It's a little bit more thinking about sort of a specific idea and moving.
We then received some questions regarding how specific applicants should be about the field that they want to study. Specifically, when applying for the IE placement program, applicants are wondering if they can apply and then sort of change the focus of their application with regards to sort of academic discipline, and how focused they need to be. If someone wants to study political science and international relations generally, for example, do they need to be specific within that about what they want to focus on?
I think having some element of specificity is going to help, especially talking about finding the right fit for you. To go back to the example earlier, if you're in Johnny's shoes and you want to go and do documentary journalism, and you don't mention that you want to do documentary journalism, and the first 4 universities that get shown to you are places that focus on writing for newspapers, you're not going to have a great time. That's important information to share with us. That said, and maybe our students could speak to this a little bit. I know we're getting short on time, but US academia is a little bit more open than in the UK. You will find there's a little bit more breadth, where we tend to focus a little bit more on depth. So being open-minded to approach things from maybe an interdisciplinary angle, or thinking about having sort of a couple different focuses isn't going to be a disadvantage in this process.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I saw the question coming in about broadcast journalism versus just saying you want to be interested in journalism. On the note about the way the American education system deals with it is it is very broad and you won't be shoehorned into something. So if you are interested in broadcast journalism, you're not playing yourself an extra card by not talking about it, as in there's no benefit to kind of saying, oh, general journalism, because if you're interested in broadcast journalism or whatever journalism it is, or whatever field in whatever scope and topic, you'll probably find that you are more compelling and more convincing writing about the specific nuances of what interests you than trying to play this game of like keeping a big broad picture. Because even once I got here and I wanted to do video journalism, I was able to change. And if I wanted to, I could do photo or print or anything. And that's just how it works in the US. But you're not giving yourself any advantage by not speaking really to the core of what is your application, in my opinion.
Great. Yeah. I think we've got time maybe for one more question delivered like this. And then if we didn't cover something, please email us and we'll get to it as soon as we can.
Yeah, I think finally there's quite a lot of different questions coming in about competitiveness. So how competitive is the program? How many people do we select? And does it vary between awards? Does it vary between the IE placement model and the independent placement model? If people are torn between awards, which one would we advise that they apply to?
Yeah, really good question. It is competitive. I don't want to say it's not competitive, but I also don't think it's helpful to share numbers, because the moment we start reeling off numbers and percentages, there will be people who decide that this process isn't worth their time and their energy. And that's not true. If you think probabilistically about this, you are never going to make the application that potentially secures you your place here. And so rather than thinking about what's my percentage chance of getting in, how competitive is this, take control of your own fate to an extent and write the best application you can. Take on all of the advice we've given, revisit some of the advice, because I think there's been some really excellent advice given this year that I haven't heard from students before. Look at all of the information we've given, have conversations with people. You have a certain degree of power over your own outcome here, because you can write an application that no one else can. And that sounds really corny, but I mean it. There is no one single Fulbrighter out there. There is no one university that you can attend that guarantees you a place in this program. There is no one CV you can submit. There's no course you can apply to that guarantees you a place in this program. And every Fulbrighter is different. Everyone gets here through a different means. And so there's not a way of making this any less competitive in terms of looking at the raw numbers and finding the right career path through. You just have to write the application that makes most sense for you and that most demonstrates what it is you want to do and why you're the person to do it. There are ways of obviously being strategic. If there are partner awards that apply to you, those will typically have a more limited application pool because they are a little bit more specific, and that specification is going to help. So if you have if you're in some field that is applicable to a partner award and dual disciplines, I would probably recommend looking at the partner award, just because there is going to be a more strategic route through the application pool. But again, there's no guarantees there either. So really do your research, find what's right for you, and write the application that only you can write. Great. Thank you, everyone, so much for your time today. As I already said, please email us if you have any questions that we haven't covered. Our team will be happy to try and answer them as best as we can. I'd like to take a moment to offer a huge thank you as well to Amy and Johnny for joining us today. They've offered some real wisdom, and you would do well to heed their advice. And I hope both of you have a great day ahead of you in the US, where I think it's still the morning for some of you, if not very early afternoon. But otherwise, thank you again for your time, and thank you everyone for attending this evening.